Today, as part of the ShoutOut interview series, we're going to be interviewing Edmund Lynch, who's been involved in the gay rights movement since the 1970s. Edmund used his media connections to bring media attention to the movement, which helped bring it to national attention. So what changes were you there for? So I believe you were at the inaugural meeting in 1973 of the sexual liberation movement, was it?
Yeah, it was. I was a member of the group in Trinity. I was one day in town. I saw a sign outside Trinity on a piece of paper, a sheet of paper, saying there was a meeting going to take place in number 4. And number 4 was very famous in Trinity. It was where the men's toilet was, and a lot of gay men would go in there, and or men would go in there. People weren't gay or homosexual at that time, officially, and they go in, that's where they met. But the very top of the building was the student union rooms, and that's where we used to meet. And that's where it all began. And there was 12 of us, I think, at the first. And David Norris was there. And as people often think that David was the very first person, but he wasn't. As usual, he was late. He wasn't the first person. So I was there before. And there were some very radical people at it. There was some women, and a few of us, and from that small bunch group, we decided to have a symposium. And we had a symposium on the 16th, I think, of February, following year 74, because we need publicity for it, and we need money, how to get it. I approached, because I was working on the Late Late Show at that time as a doing sound, working on sound, and I approached Gay Byrne, because Gay Byrne was very approachable, despite what people felt that he was kind of God, and he couldn't do such things. So I said to him, "Would you have someone on the show?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Would you pay for the person's flight from London?" He said, "Yeah." "And will you put them up in a hotel?" And he said, "Yeah." So despite the fact that any government agencies or anything at that stage weren't given any money to gay movements, because Gay Health Action later on had problems getting money out of the government because it was a policy, it was against the law, and so forth. And the person that Gay Byrne was bringing over, our pay for, was Rose Robertson. And Rose Robertson was a woman who founded an organization known as Parents Inquiry. And it was an organization that was helped, that was set up to help young people accept their sexuality and so forth. And the other, we had that for the Late Late Show. The day before, on the Liam Nolan radio show, 2 gay people spoke. Before the Angelus, believe it or not, it was Hugo McManus and the late, I forget the woman's name. They spoke on the show. So in other words, I was responsible for getting people on the RT system, because one of the complaints I heard at a meeting the other night were saying that RT weren't interested, and it was very hard to get information on it. And I explained to them that the reason it's difficult, when the information comes in, it comes into someone picks up the phone, then there's program meetings and everything else, but it eventually does get there. And almost when the Gay Pride was on, I was able to get RT to cover it, simply because I knew the system of being in touch with the person in charge, and that's the way you do it.
It was decided last year there was a need for a magazine on general sale to the general public, both gay and non-gay people, which shows the range of interest that gay people have, not necessarily into gay politics, but the ordinary everyday sort of articles and sort of issues that people are interested in.
So just on your media background, so what exactly was your role in RT, and what was it like to be an openly gay man working in RT? Because as you say, you used your connections in RT to create more of a media presence around the sexual liberation movement. So what was it like for you to be openly gay and working and the national broadcaster?
Well, I was in TV sound at the beginning, working on shows, and it gave me an opportunity to work with all the big wigs and everything else, who turned out to be ordinary, plain people, and no problems on that. I found out with my colleagues and all that, no problems. But I think maybe some of the people at the higher level of RT might have been members of Knights of Columbanus, and they might have been anti-gay. And it did affect me, I suppose, being promoted, but I never worried about it. I just didn't. I didn't care. But I just knew that RT were great. In other words, I was one person that started the collection of all newspapers, and I bring them into RT. I haven't cut them out and paste them, bring them in and get them photocopied. Because the paper disintegrates. A lot of people don't seem to realize that. So you have to photocopy them and preserve them. I found RT was a good place. Some people found it hard to be gay in RT. I didn't, because I was good at able to use the place in a good possible way, you know, and also to get information and also spread information. And the way I spread information, it was who you ended up having coffee with during breaks and things like that. But some people found it hard. Some people would never come out. But the idea that RT was full of gay people wasn't true. Maybe it is now. But at that time, it wouldn't have been too many. They were all on radio.
And then you were one of the founders of the Hirschfeld Centre. So will you tell us about the Hirschfeld Centre? Because I never even heard of it until only about 2 years ago. And also there's an interesting connection between the Hirschfeld Centre and the Eurovision Song Contest in Ireland, I believe. So can you tell us more about the centre and the connection?
David Norris and myself together were involved with other people in the Irish gay rights movement, and it was disagreement in politics, because Irish people love politics, so there's always disagreement. So David and I were interested in changing the law, but other people were more interested in social events. And I think they've got to go together, and they've got to use them. But eventually when on long walks around town, David spotted the place where the Hirschfeld Centre was, and we ended up getting it. It turned out that the owner of the place lived in Greystones, lived near David Norris, so David Norris got to know him that way, you know. But the important thing is that when we got it, we needed a dance floor and everything else. And we picked the second floor as a place for the best place for disco, flickers, which was a Dutch word for faggots. So I approached a friend of mine in RT, Jim O'Hare, who was a person who designed a Wanderley wagon, the mad kids show. That's, you know, Here Comes the Wagon with King Rory and the puppets and everything else. And we were looking around RT workshop, what they might have, you know, was there anything that they're getting rid of? But we found the set for the National Song Contest was outside it. It was broken up and been thrown out. And we asked, can we have it? We got it. So there we had the National Song Contest, which would have Eurovision Connections as our set. And we're lucky enough that we had to get carpenters to do everything. And we got the carpenters on a Nixer from RT and paid them. And they were the ones that did the design of it. And the same way we used for sound, the great people were great at being able to get in music from the States, because they seemed to be flying backwards and forwards and everything else, and have the latest records. We had a Bose system, Bose sound, which was only new at that time. And that's how the sound was, you know, and that's the way it went.
And what was it like in the Hirschfeld Centre? Because it sounds like such a safe haven for people. So what was the atmosphere like? What was it like to be there and spend time there?
It was very exciting. As well as having disco, there were other rooms, there were other meetings for different things and so forth. And people would come. No drink was allowed, believe it or not.
Oh.
Yeah, I know. For a lot of young people find it was peculiar going to a disco with no drink. There was no drink. There was a good coffee bar.
Why no drink?
because you'd have to have a license. And it wasn't easy to get licenses at that stage, and it costs money. And then you have one of the things that when we started to open up the place, we did go down to the Gardaí in College Green. And we met the superintendent down there, whose name was Superintendent Robinson. And when we asked him about where we were, where we're going to be, he was pretty good about it. Despite what people say about it, it's extraordinary. The Gardaí can be very good because they want to see a problem contained, that they don't have to work on anything. So I mean, that's the way it would work. Noel Brown, he was one of the people, and the late Enda McDonough, who recently died. They were all good supporters, I mean, they support the idea of having opened up a telephone service, which was in the Herschel Centre, called Telefriend. It was very important for a lot of people to ring in and say who they were and so forth,
And I suppose, do you think, are there any areas we still need to work on for, rights of the community in Ireland today?
Yes, one of the areas that's very important, and that no one seems to be working at it, there needs to be established homes or apartments for older LGBT people, because it's one of the things that a lot of LGBT people growing up are having a good time, enjoying themselves and everything else, and may not think in terms of getting a permanent place to live. And when you rent premises, it doesn't mean that you'll be guaranteed for life the way you might be in another country. So it's one of the areas that has to be thought of, that older people, because we are all getting old now, getting old from the day you're conceived. And it's important that this must be thought of, because a lot of people are living in apartments, or as now call them, but to me it's flats, are living in flats, and they're there forever, but they may not be in good condition, maybe damp. They may get ill very fast without people thinking about it. But I think that's one of the areas that has got to be looked at.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Edmund, and thank you so much for your contribution to the movement over the years, and you're still contributing, and thank you so much for taking part in the series.
No problems at all.